let's let's pivot over to the MAHA agenda, right? So I like to check in periodically with RFK Jr. to see if his skin has gotten any less leathery, to see if his voice has gotten any less annoying, to see if he's gotten any more principled, if he's dropped the TRT, just again another wellness check. And over on the Making America Healthy Again side, there was a report written up by what I guess it was Health and Human Services under RFK on a host of issues, right? So let's check in, see what RFK Jr. is saying is wrong with Americans health wise, right? There are a lot of things wrong with Americans, but physically health wise. But before we do that, I am going to read a few of the chats. I want to make sure I'm engaging appropriately. Andy Boom, world's healthiest man, RFK Jr. More and more people are saying that. Everyone's always saying, like, look at how healthy he looks. This is what a healthy guy's skin texture is like. People are always saying that. But hey, I have eczema. That's what's going on with him, right? A lot of people have skin issues. Okay. Yeah, let's see what's going on with RFK Jr.
A lot of it focuses on chronic disease in children, which in part, when you read into this, essentially says that you believe a lot of that has to do with ultra-processed foods, chemical exposures, lack of physical activity, stress, and excessive use of prescription drugs. If people are reading this and say, okay, but what are the solutions to fix that? What would you say?
Well, this exercise was really a diagnostic exercise, and it's important because this has never happened in the federal government, where you have all the agencies recognizing we have a chronic disease crisis. And President Biden did his HHS directives. The word chronic disease was never mentioned. And so and my uncle tried to do this in 1962 after Rachel Carson's book came out.
I will say, not to give the devil his due. He is read like the devil. Not to give the devil his due. I do agree that America has a chronic health issue that is rooted in things other than people's specific genetic traits in a vacuum. There are many things that Americans are subjected to environmentally, and by I mean physically environment, like pollution and lack of access to clean water, and then also like in their social and educational environment that lead them to develop like chronic illness. I think a lot of times when people want to criticize stuff like RFK Jr., they might go a little bit too far when it comes to trying to like delegitimize every single thing that he says, when in reality, we know that this is how conspiracy theorists work. They highlight a problem that may or may not be real, but oftentimes at least has a kernel of truth to it, at least one that people might observe to be true, even if they misinterpret the causes or the magnitude of it, and then pivot away from whatever they've acknowledged into a solution that is wholly unsuited to solve the problem and is mostly just in line with whatever political objective they have. But I do think we need to be able to talk about the ways in which the American environment, as a result of capitalism usually, is contributing to like physical maladies and psychological maladies, without people trying to, and again, I understand where I think a lot of this comes from on the left when it comes to being like overly reactive when it comes to talking about certain types of like mental and physical disabilities. But we do have to be able to talk about the way in which the environment actually contributes to those things and not treat them as though there are inherent qualities that people are necessarily going to develop for no reason, right? Because, I think that delegitimizes a large problem that people should have with capitalism in our society, which is that like it makes us all worse, like less healthy, less like physically and psychologically and emotionally there. It has a lot of negative consequences outside of the financial and the social. It actually implicates our health. And some people just, by nature of wanting to destigmatize disability or mental health issues, they don't, I don't want to say they overly normalize it. They aren't necessarily fully engaging with the ways in which is that they are normal, but they're being exacerbated or caused by things in our environment. We have the normal capacity to develop disabilities or mental or physical maladies, but a lot of them are coming from our unhealthy environments, not unhealthy due to personal choices, oftentimes unhealthy due to like conditioning and also like choices made for us by capitalism.
And unfortunately, he was killed before that. For 60 years, we've been waiting for the government to recognize that there's a crisis in chemical exposures and the increase in chronic disease. This was important for that, but this was just the diagnostics. 60 days from now, we put out the prescription. So we will put out a series of policies to address this issue and to eliminate the chronic disease epidemic.
Yeah, but I'm sure you've been thinking about this. I mean, a lot of these are things that you've been saying for years now.
Yeah, and we're already doing it.
I forgot, but what her question was. The answer is that he doesn't have any solutions to it because ultimately he is just in his position for attention. And all of the solutions are related to like bridging the gap in financial and social inequality in America, which the Republican Party generally has no interest in doing. The Trump administration has no interest in doing. And so there really is no meaningful solution present in RFK Jr.'s plans because the solution would inherently be like a leftist solution, right? You might be able to like tinker around the edges of like making certain chemical dyes illegal or certain like types of antibiotics in agriculture or pesticides illegal, but those are just hoops for companies to jump through. Those are just like hurdles to be overcome, at some point in the near to midterm future if they affect profitability. It would require a wholesale reimagining of the way in which we engage in our environment, wholesale, right? In order for us to actually deal with this chronic health problem as he's referring to it as.
I mean, we were already getting rid of the food dyes. We're changing the SNAP program so that, we now are handling a tsunami of applications by the states to give them SNAP waivers, so to get sodas and candies off of SNAP. We're reviewing the dietary guidelines, and we're going to have those out by August. And the dietary guidelines under President Biden were 453 pages, and they were basically a product of the same kind of industrial impulses that put Fruit Loops at the top of the food pyramid.
But you're saying in 60 days, people should expect to see concrete solutions of how these things can be solved?
We're already reviewing the GRAS standards, the generally recognized as safe standards. We've done more in 100 days than my predecessors have done in decades in terms of redressing the causes of this problem. And we're going to keep doing that. We're not waiting for this to come out, but we are going to do comprehensive diagnostics across the entire government of what each
like the whole. And this is not just RFK Jr.'s shtick. This is the whole value. This is the whole value of RFK Jr. in the Trump administration. This is the whole value of this kind of like health focused conspiracy crankery that RFK Jr. represents. And it's like core value proposition within our society currently, which often leaves people disempowered by nature of the many little injustices that they face every day. And sometimes the big injustices they face every day as a result of living in our like neoliberal society, right? It's the same phenomenon that Jordan Peterson was able to tap into when he first like emerged as this new lifestyle coach / right-wing figure. And that's like, he's trying to sell people a solution to chronic health issues, a solution to your health being bad in general that is not rooted in any kind of structural or systemic problem and is something you can do even if you don't have access to the healthcare system that should be afforded to you as a result of being a member of no offense, a developed society like it is in most parts of the world. He wants people to think that their health issues can be solved by like issuing a new like food pyramid or getting rid of like chemical dyes and stuff. Like he's interested in personalized solutions and again, a few tinkering around the edges solution to like what is a widespread epidemic of unhealthy situations that people are put into by nature of the society they live within. And it's just a reality that like, most people are not going to be made healthy or unhealthy by their personal choices alone. It's going to be a constellation of things related to like the situations in their life that are outside of their control and the situations that are inside of their control. And a lot of people have things inside their control in ways that are, rather, I'll back up a second and say it's very empowering to believe that, not just in the field of health, but in the field of a lot of different things going on in your life, that you can solve your issues by simply making a handful of different like personal choices. But the government should also be in charge. And, this is what the RFK Jr. Health and Human Services agency is not going to do, of establishing like new structures and systems that encourage and allow people and facilitate people being able to live their healthiest lives. Like just telling people to eat better without providing anything that would allow them to eat better, increased amounts of money, lower costs of food. Like this is all happening. All of these like new revelations about people's health and what contributes to chronic disease and how it's like environmental and how we can also, this is all coming out in the context of them slashing the EPA, them cutting NIH, them cutting the CDC, them cutting Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, the places where you would be able to get food, a healthy food. All of these things are happening because they want you to focus on like, well, it's your personal choices of what to consume that are really going to dictate whether or not you're healthy. And it's just, certainly you can consume things personally that will make you less likely to be healthy or even just totally unhealthy. No one's denying that can be contributing or even the sole factor of why you're unhealthy. But for a lot of people, it's going to be a combination of environmental and, environmental situations they find themselves in by nature of the world they live in their personal choices, which might be incentivized by their environmental circumstances. Like, I was a personal trainer and, I have had clients in the past, none recently, but a lot of times you'll deal with somebody and you just have to be like honest with them, like who will go like, well, I want to be like big, buff, when I have huge muscles, when I be like this level of shape, but I only have like 30 minutes a day to work out. I only have 30 minutes a day to work out because I work a job where I have to get up at 7 a.m. in the morning to commute 2 hours. Then I have to commute 2 hours back home where I have a wife and kids who need me to be present for them, present and energetic for them. I can't just come in and go right to sleep or like ignore my family. I have like responsibilities outside of getting fit. Like what is the best program for me to get like huge, big muscles to look like X, Y, and Z person on Instagram? And, if you are trying to sell someone a course, not that I ever did that, but like on Instagram, you just make something up. You go like, oh, well, if you give 30 minutes a day to my special shoulder routine, you'll have, like, the answer is like, there is nothing you can do. Because like ultimately your circumstances are such where you have a limited amount of time to dedicate to working out and other responsibilities that take priority. And so like unless you can like carve out extra time outside those priorities and, I assume you need to sleep, you're just not in the environment that would allow you to cultivate the kind of physical health or physical signifier of health that you'd like. And that is just the case, right? Sometimes you just can't overcome those things and you have to be able to like actually identify where your actual, what is actually impeding your ability to like reach certain heights of attainment. But like, yeah, they want to convince you that you don't need the government to do anything to make you more healthy. But obviously that is not the case.
These agencies need to be doing to end the epidemic.
Well, and you're talking about working with other agency heads. The EPA is also on your commission, and as part of this, Lee Zeldin was there in the room. Your report says that kids are exposed to harmful environmental toxins and microplastics. I wonder how you square that with some moves that we've seen the EPA take to roll back or to weaken rules that limit forever chemicals in drinking water, which obviously would be one of those issues.
We're working very hard on PFAS. A lot of what you read about EPA's regulations, rolling back regulations on PFAS is not true.
Okay.
PFAS is something I've been working on for years. I was part of the trial team in the first case against PFAS, and it is a priority for my agency. It's also a priority for Brooke Rollins at USDA because the PFAS is now on farm crops. And we're going to do everything in our power to limit the proliferation of PFAS in the environment and limited its use as in manufacturing.
So it sounds like you don't think that those rules should be weakened or rolled back or postponed, as some of the instances have shown.
I can't talk to the details of what's come out of EPA on that issue. I know that I've asked Lee about it 2 days ago, and he said everything that we've been reading about it is wrong, that he's committed to regulating PFAS and PFOAs.
Yeah, I haven't seen them say otherwise publicly, but I think it would just raise questions of, the EPA is promising this huge environmental rollback. How does that coincide with what you'd like to see happen here? People may say, is the left hand talking to the right hand?
You just need to take fish oil supplements is what he's going to answer ultimately, or he's going to lie about the EPA things being rolled back, because he knows it's hypocritical. But again, conspiracy theorists like RFK Jr. are not worried about the consistency of their beliefs or how they impact reality. They're worried about like having a position of prominence to make themselves feel like they're being like treated like an expert.
Well, the rollbacks that Lee is trying to orchestrating there are designed to restart industrial policy. And he recognizes, many people do in this government, that economic prosperity in our country is also a social determinant of health. We found that out during the pandemic when we put people out of work and our chronic disease exploded. So we need a strong economy. We need a balance where there's a strong economy, but also those constituents and ingredients and residues that are hurting American health, that we get rid of them. And that is what the report will do in 60 days.
On ultra-processed foods and getting
into
that.
So he's saying that chronic disease jumped during the pandemic because people weren't able to go to work and be successful in their workplace. And we know that economic success is a social determinant of health. Yeah, but not in that way, right? Like, it's a social determinant of health in the way I said, because economic success oftentimes correlates with better access to like health, like healthcare resources, right? Or even like better access to other resources like time, where you could be spending to like focus on your health. But like, I think chronic disease probably jumped under COVID because of the pandemic we were all living in, as opposed to just like people getting sick spontaneously because they couldn't hustle hard enough. Like, people gotta, like, this is like the modern American version of that disease that they said slaves had, that made them like need to be slaves. Otherwise they would like, go crazy and like have some sort of like delirium and then like spontaneously combust. He's saying that Americans are so used to the yoke of like wage servitude that during the pandemic, when they didn't have to work every day, it actually made them sicker. So instead of worrying about like companies not poisoning them by like poisoning their water with forever chemicals or plastics or anything, it's most important that we make sure Americans are like worked to the bone, because that's what makes them healthy. Like that, if you had to choose between people having time off, paid time off, and not being poisoned, and them being poisoned and having to work, 60 hours a week to make ends meet, it's way better for them to be poisoned and working, because that will make them healthier, is like ultimately seemingly be his argument.
Here, you were born into a privileged background, obviously not something you can control, but I wonder what you would say to maybe a single mom of 2 kids who's reading this report about how harmful these cheap but very accessible foods are for her family, and saying, well, sometimes that's the best we can do, and that's why that's what's on the food or at the table at the end of the day, or that's what's in their lunchbox.
It's an illusion to think that processed food is cheap, because you end up paying for it with diabetes. You end up paying for it with autoimmune dysregulation, with mitochondrial dysfunction, with inflammation. And
honestly, and this may make me seem, critical, but anytime someone just like loops all types of food into like processed or ultra processed without speaking to like their actual nutritional content, or like, micro and macro, I kind of just start to dismiss their opinion a little bit. Like, ultra processed and refined sugars definitely have a big part to sit, to play in people's waning health. But like a food just being processed or not is oftentimes not, or even ultra processed is not oftentimes a good indicator or whether or not like your health will suffer some sort of malady just because you consume it. I eat ultra processed foods all the time. I eat processed foods all the time. Would I be healthier if I only ate organic or natural or locavore? Maybe, but a lot of that stuff, especially if you're active and you're focused on like the actual nutritional content of any specific food, is negligible because your body doesn't really know the difference. Of course, again, a lot of ultra processed and processed foods are likely to have certain elements in them that result in like that if you overconsume them, and it's very easy to overconsume them, such like sodium or like high fructose corn syrup in processed or ultra processed foods, that will create a health consequence. But like just being processed versus like ultra processed is not necessarily like the hugest distinction to make, right? There are lots of ways in which you can become unhealthy by simply eating like organic food. Again, these are like the kinds of like lazy narratives that people talk about when they talk about health, and they want to frame it as like a easy personal choice that people are able to make, and they don't want to focus on the fact that like a lot of people, the fact that they're eating ultra processed food or processed food is more of a symptom of a culture where health is not really valued, because health in some ways is not necessarily, correlated with like productivity in our particular, job market. And our society just doesn't want people to live very far past like their retirement age. So it really is just a situation where I don't, ultra processed foods, like it really depends on the food. Like, should you eat like a bunch of stuff? Should you drink a lot of like Coke with high fructose corn syrup? Probably not. But you shouldn't eat a lot of high sugar foods. Like you shouldn't eat 17 watermelons like either. It might not be as bad for you, but certainly it wouldn't result in like positive health outcomes.
End up paying much higher
but
cost.
I'll rewind. I know.
Paying for it with autoimmune dysregulation, with mitochondrial dysfunction, with inflammation, and you end up paying much higher costs in the long run.
But they're not paying.
Now, there are food deserts in this country,
yeah,
where people at this point have a hard time getting access. I met with the health technology companies this week, and it was extraordinary. And one of the statements they made is that there's no place in this country, in the lower 48, where you can't get access to good foods. It's not easy access, as had been in the past, and that's been part of the economic drivers, and also...
Okay, well, I got bad news for you. There's every place in the lower 48, whatever, all states in America where you can't access good food. Because do you know why? In order to access good food, or to access food at all, you need money. So like, boom. Like there are perhaps no places in America where if you have money to spend on food, a significant amount, you can't access it. But it's not as though we go around willy-nilly handing out food to anyone who might need it. Like ultimately we're trying to stop doing that. This is what the Republican big beautiful bill is trying to do. Like, so, it just is not the case. And because access to food, as we know, it's like, that's just a way to like get around the fact that people don't have it, because like, oh, well, theoretically you could have it if you had the resources to get it.
The fact that people don't understand that these processed foods are poison.
But
They're more and more, and you're watching companies.
If they're literally poison, you should be banning them point blank. Like I just feel like that's the case, and we know that he's not going to do that because this is just like TikTok, Instagram health crankery. But like, if you truly believe that they're putting out poison, name the companies right now and be like, we're coming for you. But we know he's just like speaking generally, vaguely. He knows that like Kellogg is not afraid. He knows that Hershey is not afraid. He knows that none of these the companies, no Coke, Pepsi, they're not afraid.
Now, that are changing their ingredients because of this movement.
Mm-hmm. Like who?
And are making good food more available to Americans because they're demanding it. There was no demand for it before.
Yeah, there was no demand for it.
This report is about getting every American to demand the accessibility to good whole food in their neighborhoods. And that, it's going to be a process, but it's already happening. You see these big fast food conglomerates that are switching from seed oils to beef tallow fat.
You mean
You
Steak
see
and Shake?
them reducing the ingredients. You see Chobani yogurt changing its ingredients because
That's a good example of like seemingly like big change, but that's like fake. Like changing from like seed oil to fry French fries into like beef tallow. Like if you think that's going to make a meaningful difference, if you're choking down like multiple like Big Macs and like large fries a week, it really won't. It might make a minuscule difference over the course of like your lifetime, but theoretically, if you're eating the amount that you should be eating, broadly speaking, of those fries, it shouldn't impact you that much. Like it's like, that's a change geared towards people who are going to overconsume something, and even then, like just the overconsumption of that thing is going to lead to negative health consequences, regardless of what is fried in. Come on, like
demand that has happened because of the MAHA movement.
The MAHA
we
movement.
are going to make sure they have apps that mothers who go into the grocery store have an app that they can show on
It's an app.
flash on the barcode of every product,
Okay.
and get a green light, red light, or yellow light.
For what?
That will allow them.
HHS is creating that?
We're working with industry to do it, and they're already doing it.
Private-public
The
partnership, an
Mark
app.
company has
MyFitnessPal.
done it. Patrick Singh's company has done it. There are many, many apps out there that I use one called Yucca. That is my wife and I consider it invaluable. You can go into any grocery store, flash it at any product, and you can get a go or a no on it.
What?
And as that happens, the market, we're not trying to create an anti-state here. We're trying to drive market forces that will drive change in the kind of food Americans get.
In
Through good information and good science.
In anticipation of this report, there was a lot of pushback from farmers, agricultural groups. I know you heard from some Republican senators up on Capitol Hill who were worried about what it would mean for pesticides, ones that have been approved already by the EPA. I want to get your response to what one Illinois farmer, who is also the National Corn Growers Association president, Kenneth Hartman Jr., he told the Wall Street Journal, if the administration's goal is to bring more efficiency to government, then why is the MAHA Commission duplicating efforts by raising questions about pesticides that have been answered repeatedly through research and reviews by the EPA?
There's nothing in this report that will worry the American farmer. The person who made that statement had never seen the report. So
you won't reverse anything the EPA has approved?
Listen, we consider, and I said this during the 2.5 years that I was running for president, there's no...
Yeah, if you guys want to be healthy, if you want to know if your food is safe to eat, if it gets a green light or red light, make sure you download the app that I'm sure will have some sort of paid subscription service, or will be harvesting your data to sell to the same companies that are trying to poison you, according to RFK Jr. Like, that's all you got to do. Pay $7 a month to scan your food, and then like not be too beat up about like the companies that are poisoning you getting all of your like consumption data. It's really simple. It's all very simple.
Farmers in this country are in trouble. And I met with
because of Donald Trump
in the Midwest this week, and they consistently told me 7 out of every 10 years we are losing money. If we lose the farmers, the MAHA agenda is bankrupt. We need the farmers as partners. We need to keep them in business. We don't want to put a single farmer out of business. What we want to do is create incentives and innovation to allow them to innovate themselves, to use less chemical intensive, but we're not an anti-state. We're not going to coerce people. We're not going to tell them what to do. We're going to give them the opportunity. And we found in the farm community that that the majority of farmers, they are the original environmentalists. They want to produce healthy food, and we need to give them the ability to do that, and the economic incentives and the technology we already have healthy food. We need to produce the best food that we can possibly, and continue to do that.
You mentioned your presidential run, and some farmers may look at that and be skeptical of what you're saying, because you made comments like saying that you could weaponize the other agencies against chemical agriculture by doing good science on the chemicals that you say are poisoning us, high fructose corn syrup, and it's linked to the obesity epidemic. So if they're worried you're going to weaponize other agencies against them.
And that's processed food, and I think we've all agreed that processed food is not a good thing for human health.
Well, I agree that high fructose corn syrup is uniquely bad. But again, that's something that we subsidize as a country because like our farmers grow it and there's no use for it essentially. People probably don't even remember the high fructose corn syrup ads that they used to play on television to get people to treat high fructose corn syrup like normal sugar. But yeah, it's not normal sugar for sure. But again, these are like drops in the buckets when it comes to the fact that a lot of people just don't have the time or education to dedicate to, engaging in healthful behaviors. And a lot of the things that make people unhealthy are outside of their control because they're like poisons that are polluting the water by companies that, Donald Trump is giving like immunity for doing it to.
And that we're driving a diabetes epidemic. Caitlin, when I was a kid, my uncle was president.
Oh God!
The average pediatrician at that
time. His uncle was president. Did you guys know about this? Like that RFK Jr.'s uncle was president. This is the first I'm hearing about it.
So one case of juvenile diabetes in his lifetime, over a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 38% of teens are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door has that, and it's costing us $1 trillion a year just for that kind of mitochondrial dysfunction. It's bankrupting our country. It's making it 75% of American kids can't qualify for military service.
Let me ask you about something you said when you were on Capitol Hill this week. You were asked about the lead crisis in Milwaukee schools. You told Congress, quote, "We have a team on the ground in Milwaukee." The city said that's not true and that they are still not getting the help that they want from the CDC. Do you know who is on the ground? Who were you under the impression?
The CDC is giving them assistance with their labs, their analytics, and advice.
They just said 1 technician was on the ground.
I can't tell you how many are on the ground in the city of Milwaukee, but I can tell you we are there.
But you don't know how many?
I can't tell you how many right now.
So
can you give me a ballpark figure?
The Milwaukee Health
like
Commissioner?
A few dozen, 1, like how many, like you can't tell me at all. Like RFK Jr. is like, he's a scammer. You should understand that. That's why he gets along with Trump so well. Like he's also a scammer.
And Senator Tammy Baldwin. Yeah.
You could read my other exchanges with Tammy Baldwin, and anyway, I'm not necessarily believing what Senator Baldwin.
So you're disputing and saying that there are more than 1 CDC employees.
Like I said, we have 62,000 employees. I'm not sure how many we have deployed to Milwaukee. I'm happy to check and give you that information.
And are you committed to helping with the schools there? Because obviously they're having a real issue with this and say it's really affecting the students.
Of course, I've been working on lead in the schools including in Milwaukee, for 40 years. It is a crisis in our country. 44% of black youth in our municipalities have dangerous levels of lead in their blood. And that is crippling them for a lifetime, potentially. So it's an issue that is foremost on my mind. It's a high priority, and it's something we'll continue to be involved with.
Okay. And we're talking about...
Yeah, I mean, all of these are real problems. Some of them he's trying to hyper-focus on to the exclusion of other ones, right? Because, he wants you to focus on personal consumption choices that you can make in your day-to-day life to make you more healthful. And those are things you can do, but... for a lot of people, not everybody, right? Just go same with the Jordan Peterson thing. Some people's lives can be dramatically improved by, cleaning their room. And some people, no matter how clean their room gets, they will still have to deal with an incredible amount of hardship in their social material living situation, right? And so, RFK Jr. wants to do the same thing. Try to convince you that your personal consumption choices are the only and biggest hurdle you have to overcome to live a healthful life. And maybe if you live an incredibly privileged life, but even then, maybe not, right? But a lot of people are impeded in their desire to live healthful lives by a series of structural and systemic factors. Even these, he's saying, these black kids with too much lead in the schools, the hundreds of counties in America with bad water as bad as Flint or worse than Flint, Michigan's water. These are all systemic and environmental factors that are causing people to be unhealthy, that the Trump government, no matter what RFK Jr. tries to allude to here, vaguely, just has no interest in really solving. And so, I like to avoid taking, narratives like this have the intended impact of making people feel empowered, to make the kinds of changes in their lives that will lead to, like, positive outcomes. But they also have the side effect of making it seem as though the only thing keeping you from having a life full of like those kinds of positive outcomes, those kinds of like positive and successful material conditions that you might necessarily find yourself devoid of now, are personal changes you can make. And it's just not true for a lot of people. And it's no different from the normal neoliberal slop propaganda people hear and they take in. It's just framed with the language of the new age empowerment movement, the new age, health conspiracy movement, which makes people feel empowered in a way that is oftentimes, not common for them in a society as disempowering as the one that we live in. But they do have the byproduct of disempowering people once they fall into the situation where they realize, I did clean my room and my life didn't get any better. Maybe there's something wrong with me. A lot of people will still turn that inward because cleaning my room was supposed to help. Like, cutting out ultra processed food was supposed to help my health issues or whatever, and it didn't help. And reasons because I'm being poisoned by the benzene that's pumping into my water via like fracking or some shit.
The big release of this report today. The next report that you've said that you'll produce is in September, when you want to determine the cause of autism. Do you still plan to know the cause of autism?
The dietary guidelines come out in August, and the second stage of this report also comes out in August.
Okay, so that's in August. But this would be in September, when you said that you would be able to determine what the cause of autism is. Is that still the timeline that you are sticking with?
We will have some studies completed by September. And those studies will mainly be replication studies of studies that have already been done. We're also deploying new teams of scientists, 15 groups of scientists. We're going to send those grants out to bid within 3 weeks.
Why would you replicate studies that have been done?
Because the only way you can get good science is through replication. If you don't have replication, you don't know whether other scientists looking at the same data will arrive at the same conclusion. Good science always includes replication. In fact, we're changing the procedures at NIH so that up to 20% of the funding at NIH is for replication. If you don't have replication, you have incentives to cheat. And there's a lot of cheating that goes on in science.
Okay, but some people might dispute that, but looking at your April 10th comments when you were inside the Capitol.
I'm sorry, what? So I have to rewind that because I don't think I took that in properly.
Okay, so that's in August. The cause.
And the second stage of this report also comes out in August.
Okay, so that's in August. But this would be in September, when you said that you would be able to determine what the cause of autism is. Is that still the timeline that you are sticking with?
We will have some studies completed by September. And those studies will mainly be replication studies of studies that have already been done. We're also deploying new teams of scientists, 15 groups of scientists. We're going to send those grants out to bid within 3 weeks.
Why would you replicate studies that have been done?
Because the only way you can get good science is through replication. If you don't have replication, you don't know whether other scientists looking at the same data will arrive at the same conclusion. Good science always includes replication. In fact, we're changing the procedures at NIH so that up to 20% of the funding at NIH is for replication. If you don't have replication, you have incentives to cheat. And there's a lot of cheating that goes on in science.
Okay, but some people might dispute that, but looking at your April 10th comments when you were...
So I get what he's trying to say, or at least what he's gesturing towards to try to confuse people, right? Obviously, one of the qualities of, not good science, but one of the qualities of a scientifically true fact is that it was produced and can be reproduced under similar circumstances, right? So for example, if you were able to make something happen by going through a series of steps, and then you put out a report or paper, or you say, hey, if you go through these series of steps, it leads to this result, you would, for that to be scientifically accurate, people would have to be able to go through those same steps and reproduce your results. Validity, accuracy, reproducibility are all important in the scientific, like the realm of science, right? But for most studies that are done, usually the reproduction of the work is done as part of the study itself, right? So, and you have to excuse me, I'm not this kind of scientist, but like the way he makes it sound is that like some doctors at Harvard like say that they found a new molecule, or they found a new treatment, or they've discovered a new like blank, and they put out a paper and it's not valid or something because they only did it one time. It's like, no, usually those scientists who put out the initial paper, regardless of what it's on, right, have reproduced the experiment multiple times. They've done the work of reproducing the work. They've run the tests. Not only have they run the tests, but they have run the math to make sure that they've run the tests enough times to give a certain level of confidence in the how replicatable the tests are, right? So like they understand that that's a quality of good science. It sounds like what he is saying that is like after the doctors at Harvard run those tests, like, let's say you have to, whenever I think of stuff like this, and I always make fun of people. I always make fun of people for like referencing movies, but I always think of like in movies when they like make new drugs and they have like the computer graphic that shows like the molecule with the ball and the rods like rotating and like shifting around, and then they go like, and then it just like falls apart after a few seconds. Like, and then they just do that. Like they change little things about it until like it works for a long period of time. It's like in his imagination, they only run the experiment one time at Harvard, and then they go like, oh, okay, that's good. Let's like package it up, and so that it makes that the Health and Human Services or whatever department under his purview should reproduce the experiment at Health and Human Services. But like that's not how it works. They do the reproduction of the work. Like, like the initial scientists, and then people that, their peers review it. They go through that process. Having another layer of that is what he's seemingly describing. Like he wants to make every experiment that comes across the Health and Human Services desk, he wants to have a team dedicated to running the same study again. Not like, reviewing it, not doing like they want to run the experiment. That's not really how science works, right? Like, does that all make sense? Like he just, it almost seems like he thinks that like the initial scientists only do the experiment or like try the molecule, like they do a clinical test and they try it on like one person and they go like worked on this guy, but that's not how any of that works, obviously.
Inside the cabinet meeting, you said by September we will know what has caused the autism epidemic and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
We'll have some of the information to get the most solid information.
Backing down already.
Take us another 6
Guess we
months.
won't know.
Okay, so parents should not expect to know what causes autism by September anymore.
We'll see. We're going to, as I said, we're going to replicate some of the studies that have already been done that look like sound studies. And we'll know a lot from those, and then we'll know a lot more afterward.
But not the definitive answer by September, just to be clear, because it matters.
It depends what those replicable studies show.
Okay, and then what do you expect to happen 6 months after that? You mentioned something else in 6 months.
I expect we will know the answers of the etiology of autism.
Okay, so that timeline is moving from September to 6 months after September.
As I said, we're going to begin to have a lot of information by September. We're not going to stop the studies in September. We're going to be definitive, and the more definitive you are, the more it drives public policy.
Okay, so that would put us at, what, March next year? You say you'll know the cause of it?
As I said, it's about 6 months after September. A lot of these studies will begin coming back.
You also said something recently when you were on Capitol Hill, and you were being asked about vaccines and whether or not you would recommend them for people out in the United States. And you said that people should not take medical advice from you. You are the HHS secretary, though, and your job is to create guidance.
That was funny,
and
yeah.
to talk about vaccines and medical testing.
But that was his like online vaccine anti-vaxxer like conspiracy crank like side coming out, because that's their automatic response to being confronted with their lack of knowledge about any specific thing in healthcare by someone. They'll espouse endlessly about how you can cure any number of diseases with any number of supplements or vitamins or natural oils. And then when you go like, that's bullshit, you don't know what you're talking about, they'll like do the Joe Rogan thing. They're like, well, I'm not a doctor, don't take me seriously about any of this stuff, because I don't want to take responsibility for it. But that was his, like, I think, automatic response that he's cultivated over years and years of doing that. And he forgot that in this particular circumstance, how it was going to come out, right? That like, oh, but that's your job, right?
Why should people not take medical advice from you?
Well, they probably shouldn't take medical advice from any HHS secretary. Very few of the HHS secretaries historically, I think, maybe 10 or 20%, 15% have been doctors. People were asking me, I was responding to a question about my personal health choices. And I said, that's not relevant, because people should not make their decisions based upon my personal health choices. We have an infrastructure. We have an advisory committee on immunization practices that makes recommendations. It's a group of scientists that looks at reams of data, and that's where our recommendations come from, not from an individual.
But you're leading
it's
all
time,
of those agencies.
one of the big mistakes that you and many other of your media colleagues made during COVID is to try to convince the American people that they should trust the experts. Trusting the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism.
Oh God, I'm very familiar with this type of argument from anti-science conspiracy theorists, and it's very popular amongst them because they like to rely on what is an essential quality of living in a society where people have expertises that you might not have by nature of you having your own expertise, which is that oftentimes you have to outsource some of your decision making to people who are just more familiar with the topic or the decision itself, with the mechanics of something like medicine, right? Obviously when it comes to medicine, you're still making some decisions towards like, what am I going to consume? Am I going to take this medicine my doctor gave me, or am I going to like not take it? Things like that. But for conspiracy theorists, they like, and this goes back to his I'm just really struggling with that word today. The reproducibility of scientific experiments and the value for him of reproducing every experiment that comes across his desk. They want to pretend as though science is only as valuable as what you yourself can reproduce in any given moment, or what you yourself fully understand. So I'll use an analogy for you, and hopefully it's an illustrative one and not like a load-bearing one. The flat earthers will pretend as though if you can't fully describe the mechanism by which the earth spins and how gravity functions and how our atmosphere stays attached to the earth and our electromagnetic layer and shit like that, that somehow you're as bad as like a cult member because you don't love science, you don't believe in science, you just worship science. You do something that's called scientism, where you treat scientific facts and theories as though they are just like religious doctrine, because you're not engaging with them like critically, right? You're not engaging with every fact about the universe critically as you navigate it. But that's because most people have like jobs and ideas that they have to engage with outside of how gravity functions every single day of the week. That kind of specialization allows society to function, but because they're oftentimes obsessed either with both with a specific field, like flat earthers with the shape of the earth and associated sciences like astrophysics, geology, stuff like that. Because they're obsessed with that stuff and they're always engaging with it, they think it's just like a normal, natural thing that everyone should be doing. Everyone should always be reinventing the wheel all the time, as opposed to just like accepting, the things that like scientific experts produce as being at least within the realm of scientifically reasonable without having to parse through all of that stuff. And that's always they pretend like it's some sort of like virtue on their part. They're just like the real scientific curious people. But no, mostly it's just people like RFK Jr. who have like an antagonistic relationship to the idea of expertise that they don't have an inherent legitimacy in, right? This is, I think attractive to people who don't like the idea of there being anyone out there who has a greater claim to a level of knowledge or understanding in any field that they don't have that claim to. This is like the crisis of expertise that really exists in America, where we've been conditioned to be so toxically individualistic and so like hyper egocentric that the idea of like an expert for some people, not everybody, a lot of people don't mind because a lot of people like trust their doctors. Although a lot of people have trouble trusting doctors in general due to like the history of medical malpractice in America. And I don't mean like malpractice, like, a surgeon left, pair of scalpel or a scalpel inside of me during surgery. I mean malpractice like the Tuskegee experiments or the forced sterilization of certain populations like Puerto Ricans or the mentally handicapped in asylums during the early parts of the 20th century and 18th century, obviously. But some people have antagonistic relationships to doctors because of the idea of someone telling them what to do and someone having an opinion about something related to them, like their bodies, that is more valuable and considered more like socially important than their own opinion. Some people have a really hard time dealing with that, like that their opinion on every specific issue is not as socially valuable as the opinion of like some other person who's an expert. And you see this like all over the place. And it's not just the fallacy or like the psychological preoccupation of really stupid people. It's also the preoccupation of a lot of people who, fall into like the semi-erudite category, like RFK Jr., people who are from like upper class or upper middle class backgrounds who occupy social positions, like occupations, like politics, like politician, public intellectual without any like background in any specific like science. So, people like columnists for the New York Times have this problem too, where the idea of like an expertise that is somehow like unrooted or like unavailable to them just makes them angry. And so with a lot of conspiracy theorists, they try to delegitimize the idea of expertise and, center the idea that anything that you haven't experienced or replicated for yourself is just you having like a cult like attachment to like an somehow like superstitious belief, right? Like I can trust the scientific products of scientists within reason, because I know that, again, money oftentimes influences scientific outcomes in our society. But generally speaking, I can trust the outcome of scientists because I can trust that, again, if they have a certain background and they're operating in certain institutions, they're likely following a series of procedures, the scientific method for one, that will legitimate their results. I don't have to go through and reproduce every scientific experiment that has ever been done in order to revalidate them, because I can trust that they've been all done through by going through the proper steps to ensure scientific validity, right? Including having people reproducing the experiment multiple times. And that's what allows our society to function and move forward. If you had to constantly reproduce every experiment, we would never get anywhere. But for, again, conspiracy cranks like this, it's a rebellion against expertise and experts who are not them. They don't like that. And it's also just like a misunderstanding of how science functions at the most basic levels.
What we should do is trust the science. And we are going to do the science.
And I will say it's a very core facet of reactionary thinking, that anything that I haven't seen or experienced or done myself somehow takes on a air of fictitiousness.
And the science is going to be replicable, and it's going to be gold standard so that parents can make their own choices about what is best for their family and their health.
But I think people, the message was to trust the science and what studies were finding and what
during
people were
COVID,
saying.
that was a bad message. It was trust the experts. That's what you kept telling us. Trust the experts.
I don't know that I ever said that.
Well,
I mean, we talked to the officials. Actually,
your
during
network
COVID,
was saying it every day.
we took the briefings live every day with all of the experts that President Trump. Those were President Trump's doctors. But those were the people President Trump brought out to the briefings.
Oh, President Trump brought, and I can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No good response to that, because like you're just someone who tries to criticize the experts, but in this case you've taken yourself on the position of like expert, and so like it's harder to lob that critique. Same with the Dan Bonginos and the Kash Patels talking about how when we get in charge of the FBI, we know that we're going to find all sorts of like secret covert ops were involved in Jan 6, only like, oh no, actually there was nothing going on actually. Like
Trump did right and what President Biden did wrong. What I'm saying to you...
But I want to get back to what your comment was about that you said that people should not take your medical advice.
Yeah.
That's your position?
Yeah, absolutely. People should not be taking medical advice. I'm somebody who is not a physician, but they should also be skeptical about any medical advice. They need to do their own research. You know, you're a mom. If you're a mom, you do your own research on your baby carriage, on your baby bottles, on your baby formula.
But they don't have medical degrees,
yeah.
Honestly. If you're a mom and you're looking at what science has been tested, they trust their doctors and their pediatricians.
One of the responsibilities of living...
No one should ever be taking medical advice from anybody but themselves. We should always be our own doctors. She's serving his dumb ass because like his points are like, it's easy to serve someone like RFK Jr. because their points are oftentimes incoherent because, again, what he's mostly focused on is that he should be getting attention and you should take him at his expertise. But then he has to argue against the very idea of expertise and don't trust me because I'm not a physician, but also don't trust physicians because they're bad. So like it's all very confusing because he doesn't have an actual principled or well-considered position outside of like, I'm important, you should listen to me. And so while saying that stuff, he also has to establish, well, maybe you shouldn't listen to me for plausible deniability in case something bad happens to you as a result of listening to him. But like in the moment, it all comes across as very confused, right? And I know I have that problem too. I also come across as very confused, but this is because it's confusing me. But yeah, you can see how this narrative and these narratives are very flattering if you're stupid though, right? He's empowering you by telling you you're just as smart as a physician. You're just as smart by nature. And parents, especially like dumb parents, love to fall for this too, because it makes them feel so good that they are the ones who know best for their babies. And that's something that we have a lot of trouble with here when it comes to like parents having, I don't want to say too many rights over their children, but parents treating their kids as though they're little like experiments or little ways, like rather little arenas to prove their political theories about the world true, right? And so they're very susceptible to this kind of argument because they want to believe that they know what's best for their kids. They want to feel like they're the experts of raising their kids, even if they don't know anything about like child rearing or pedagogy or anything like that. So like, but it relies on people having, and again, it's not just RFK Jr. Our society, and I always like to hammer home this point, our society conditions people to be susceptible to these arguments because it makes them susceptible to being scammed by any number of, legitimate actors within our political and our political sector, right? Our political media, our critical media, our politicians. They want people be enamored and susceptible to the argument like, well, yeah, but you're a really super smart guy who's really like good at stuff, so like why shouldn't you be able to be your own doctor? Like, you're smart, you're like you get it, like you like what does 4 years, 3 years, 6 years of medical training have on you when you have Google? Like that's very attractive to people who feel disempowered, and it's given a lot of like resonance with people in our society who are taught to like, believe that they are the hyper rational, hyper competent person because it allows for our politicians to justify deregulating society because like, well, you'll figure it out. Like, we don't need these regulations on food. You'll figure it out because you're really smart. Like,
a democracy where physicians and every sort of expert are subject to all kinds of biases. One of the responsibilities of living in a democracy is to do your own research, your own mind.
So that's your message to monitors, to anyone, is to do your own research.
I would say be skeptical of authority. My father told me that when I was a young kid. People in authority lie. And we've seen a lot of that in
Okay.
our country. And people in the media lie.
Okay.
And
Trust no one.
people need to make their own judgments and be skeptical and maintain their capacity for critical thinking. And that was shut down
Okay.
during COVID. And the media was complicit in that.
Disagree on that last part. Secretary Kennedy, thank you for your time.
Good to meet you, Caitlin.
I wonder, was it surprising to hear you say, hear the HHS Secretary double down?
We don't need to go any further than that. That was funny. He's funny. But again, it's just standard like conspiracy theory talking points. What makes it, I think, incredibly stark for people is that now he's in charge of like Health and Human Services, and you're hearing him like tout out those same talking points as the person who ultimately gets to decide like the CDC and NIH objectives. Common Merganser says COVID really destroyed a lot of people's brains. They act like they were murdered and literally nothing happened to them. Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of people handled it really badly because in America, a lot of people just, all they have is bread and circuses. All they have is the diversions that our capitalist society produces for them to justify the fact that they're being robbed blind every day. And so for a little bit during COVID, all of those diversions were taken away. And all people were left with were the straining social relationships in their lives that they had been unable to actively cultivate as a result of the lifestyles that capitalism forced them under. You had people who were commuting every day, multiple hours to work, suddenly spending all their time in a house with people who they had only seen meaningfully for a few hours every week for years sometimes. And a lot of people had like really bad reactions to that. And a lot of people's brains were already broken too. Like a lot of people had broken brains from the Obama birtherism stuff. Meowing Star on YouTube. I watched COVID Red Pill, so many progressives, it was disheartening. And they flocked to people like RFK who led them straight into Trump's arms. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people like progressive, a lot of people, declare themselves things politically that are totally divorced from their actual beliefs because they're popular, or they're like, they're hanging on to those identities with a thread. Be Cool Theo on Twitch says, I tend to think it was the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Nothing has been the same since then. Agree to disagree, I guess. America as a place, especially modern America, and I would say like late 70s to right now, has become especially fertile ground for all sorts of conspiratorial beliefs, cult-like thinking, fringe ideologies. And it's because they thrive in the same environment that our current political parties thrive in, which is like low information, high ego environments. Like a lot of people are very susceptible to a lot of very lazy forms of manipulation, but it has taken decades to make them that way. Decades of eroding our formal education system, making people lonely, making people poor. It's just a very fertile ground for like the situation. I mean, for conspiracy theorists to thrive in. And a lot of times, I mentioned it in the past, and I'll continue to mention it. Like you have more establishment, like legacy media sources who will rack their brain. The op-ed columnists there will like scratch their thick monkey craniums, wondering and musing in their like column spaces about like, how can people be so susceptible to conspiratorial thinking? How can people believe all these unscientific things? And then they'll publish articles with no citations. They'll publish articles with like incredibly misleading headlines. They'll publish articles with like plagiarism that are entirely anecdotal. They will establish a low standard for what constitutes like publishable works. And for a lot of people, they see something written in a newspaper and it's just like, it's true. They don't make the distinction between like journalism and op-eds. And by that nature, like that really low level of standard, that really low standard for veracity that infects our op-ed column space is just mirrored all over the conspiracy world. Like a lot of conspiracists rely on the same kind of like rhetorical techniques that our columnists rely on and our political media relies on to trick people into supporting Republicans or Democrats. Like it's just a different end goal. And that's why a lot of times when, the New York Times or whatever, the Democrats or Republicans complain about people falling down like rabbit holes, you should always just, understand that they mean you're falling down the wrong rabbit hole. You should be falling down my rabbit hole, the one that I'm leading you down, that makes you a more dedicated supporter of, Barack Obama, more dedicated supporter of the New York Times, a more dedicated supporter of the Republican agenda. Very few of our institutions that are meant to serve us, and by that I mean like political media institutions, like our legacy media outlets, are interested in cultivating critical thinking in the population. Because how critical would your thinking have to be before you realize that you're being fucked over by both parties? So it's really about I think managing those boundaries, right? So I would say it goes back to the removal of the fairness doctrine in media, but I would say got really bad under the Barack Obama becoming president, birtherism, conspiracy boom, and that Trump was deeply ingrained in, right? We all remember that, right? Trump was sending people down to Hawaii to look for his birth certificate. And so for a lot of those people, especially since that coincided with the mainstreaming of social media in some ways, you start to have apps for Facebook that your mom and your dad and your uncle can access easily, that coincides with that, which allows people to be radicalized in incredibly dangerous ways.